The evening air carried a tired kind of silence, the kind that settles over a place where struggle has become routine. At the corner of a narrow, dusty street stood a tiny wooden shop. Its faded blue paint had peeled away in patches, and its roof sagged slightly, as if even it had grown weary with time. Inside, an old woman, known to everyone simply as Burhiama, sat on a low stool, carefully arranging a few packets of biscuits, some loose candies in glass jars, and a small kettle that always seemed to be boiling. Burhiama's hands trembled as she worked, her thin fingers moving slowly, deliberately. Her breathing was uneven. Every now and then she would pause, press her chest lightly, and close her eyes, as if trying to gather strength from somewhere deep within. Bas thoda ardin nikal jain, she whispered to herself. Fear dawa la aungi. She suffered from sugar, blood pressure, and several other illnesses that had slowly taken hold of her fragile body. Every rupee she earned from that tiny shop was carefully counted, saved, and eventually spent on medicines from the hospital. That shop was not just her livelihood. It was her survival. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in dull orange hues, a boy stood across the street, watching. He was about 17, thin, with worn-out clothes and eyes that had seen far more than his age should allow. His name was Ayan. Ayan had no fixed home, no family that he could remember clearly. Life had taught him to observe more than speak, to survive more than dream. He had noticed Burhiama many times before. The way she smiled weakly at customers, the way she struggled to stand, the way she counted coins again and again, as if afraid they might disappear. But today, something felt different. Ayan leaned slightly against a broken wall, his eyes narrowing as he saw two uniformed policemen approaching the shop. Their boots hit the ground, with authority. Their presence did not bring safety, it brought fear. Burhiama saw them too, and in that moment something in her expression changed. Her hands froze. Her eyes filled with a quiet panic she tried to hide. Fear agay, she whispered under her breath. The taller of the two policemen smirked as he stepped inside the shop without permission. Oye Budia, he said casually, looking around. Aj kia kamaya hai? Burhiama immediately stood up, her body trembling. Sahab, aj yadanahi hua, bastoda sa. Her voice shook as she reached for a small cloth pouch hidden under the counter. Before she could even finish, the second policeman grabbed the pouch from her hand. Dekte hain thoda sa kitna hota hai, he said, opening it and counting the money. Burhiama clasped her hands together. Sahab, please, ye meri dawake pays hain, Mainkal Hospital. A loud slap echoed through the quiet street. Ayan's entire body stiffened. The sound cut through him like a blade. Burhiama staggered, almost falling, her frail body unable to withstand the force. Ziada bakwas matkar, the taller policeman barked. Yahandukan shalani haito hisadena padega. Without another word, they began grabbing whatever they wanted. Biscuits, packets, even the small amount of cash she had left. Burhiama didn't resist anymore. She just stood there, helpless, her eyes wet, her lips trembling, her soul quietly breaking. Across the street, Ayan's hands slowly curled into fists. His heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't just, but fear. Fear had always kept him silent, until today, his gaze shifted to his old cracked phone. For a moment he hesitated. Then, without thinking further, he pulled it out, and pressed record. His hands shook as he zoomed in. Every slap, every harsh word, every moment of cruelty. He captured it all. The policemen laughed as they walked away, stuffing their pockets, leaving behind a broken old woman and a shop that looked emptier than before. The street fell silent again. But something had changed. Ayan slowly lowered his phone, staring at the screen. His reflection stared back at him, eyes filled with anger, confusion, and something new, determination. That night, he didn't sleep. He kept replaying the video again and again. Each time, the same question echoed in his mind. Agar main bi chup raha, to fir far kya hai mujh mein aur main? The next morning, with tired eyes but a steady resolve, Ayan walked toward the police station. Each step felt heavier than the last. Fear tried to pull him back. What if they hurt me? What if no one believes me? But then he remembered Burhiama's trembling hands, her pleading voice, and he kept walking. Inside the station, the air felt suffocating. Officers moved around casually, some laughing, some ignoring him completely. Ayan swallowed hard and stepped forward. Mujhe report Lakwani hai, he said, his voice low but firm. The officer at the desk barely looked at him. Kiske khilaf? Ayan took a deep breath. Police ke khilaf. The room went silent, slowly, very slowly. The officer looked up. And in that moment Ayan realized, this was only the beginning, and the path ahead was going to change his life forever. The officer blinked at him, clearly surprised by the audacity of a teenage boy daring to report the very people who were supposed to protect the law. Ayan's fingers tightened around the phone in his pocket, the video still there, burning in his mind like evidence he could not ignore. "Sir, I have proof," he said, pulling out his phone and showing the recording. The video played and the room fell silent again. The laughter of the other officers, the slaps, the theft, all captured in brutal clarity. A senior officer who looked older and more composed than the rest stepped forward. His eyes were sharp, scanning the screen, his lips pressed into a thin line. "This is serious," he said slowly. "Do you understand what you're bringing here?" Ayan nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, sir, but I couldn't stay silent. They hurt her. She's just an old woman. She works so hard to live." The older officer sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You have courage, boy. Courage and honesty. Not many people show that these days." Meanwhile, back in the small shop, Burhiama sat on her stool, staring blankly at the empty shelves. She didn't know where her courage had gone, or whether she even deserved it, but when she heard that a young boy had gone to the station on her behalf, tears filled her eyes. "Who is this boy? Who cares so much?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Word of the incident began to spread slowly through the neighborhood. People whispered, heads turned, curious eyes followed Ayan as he walked back to the shop after giving his statement. He looked tired, but there was a fire in his eyes, a fire that had been lit the moment he chose to act, rather than watch. The days that followed were tense. The senior officer took the case seriously, and an internal investigation began. The two policemen who had terrorized Burhiama found themselves under scrutiny. Suddenly, their arrogance began to crumble. But amidst the tension, Ayan noticed something strange. The older officer, who was handling the case, kept asking him questions about his life, about his family, about where he came from. Something in the officer's tone hinted at familiarity. One afternoon, as Ayan sat in the small sunlit room at the station, the officer looked at him carefully. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Ayan frowned, unsure how to respond. "I don't know, sir. Maybe someone else?" The officer shook his head, his expression softening. "No, there's something about your eyes, your posture. It's hard to explain. You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Ayan hesitated. There were pieces of his past, blurry memories, faces he couldn't place. But something about this officer's voice tugged at something deep inside him, a part of him that had been waiting, lost in time. Meanwhile, Burhiama started recovering from the shock. With help from neighbors, she managed to repair some of the damage in her shop. Every day, she made the long trip to the hospital for her medicines, but she now had a small glimmer of hope. Ayan had shown her that courage could exist in the most unexpected places. Then one evening, the older officer invited Ayan to his office after the case had made progress. "There's something I need to tell you," he said gently, motioning for Ayan to sit. Ayan's heart beat faster. He felt that this was more than just about the case now. There was a heaviness in the air, a weight of something unspoken. "You were lost once, weren't you?" the officer said, watching him carefully. "A long time ago, when you were very small?" Ayan's eyes widened. How could this man know that? He shook his head, confused. "I think you are the son of someone very important, someone who never stopped searching for you," the officer continued, voice low and deliberate. "Your father, he's a judge, and he has been looking for you for years." Ayan froze, his mind raced. A father, a judge, could it be possible? The memories came back slowly, fragmented. A child, a brief flash of a home, a face too familiar to be a stranger. Why didn't anyone tell me?" Ayan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because you were taken long ago. Circumstances were complicated, but now you are found," the officer said, his eyes gentle, "and you need to know the truth from someone who wants to protect you." Ayan felt a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, fear, and something else. Relief, hope. He didn't know what to feel first. That night he returned to Burhiama's shop. He couldn't sit quietly anymore. Burhiama, smiling faintly. I found out about my father," he said, his voice shaking. He's a judge. I think he's been looking for me all these years." Burhiama reached out, placing a trembling hand on his. "Oh, my boy, I always knew you were special, but this is more than I could imagine." Ayan felt a lump in his throat. The small shop, the dusty street, the endless struggle. It all seemed to fade, just for a moment. He realized that the world might finally be shifting beneath his feet in a way that could change everything. Meanwhile, the police officers who had tormented Burhiama faced the consequences. Their arrogance crumbled under scrutiny. For the first time, they realized that justice was not something they could steal or control. Ayan's courage, the evidence he had captured, had held them accountable. But Ayan's own journey of understanding his past, reclaiming the life that had been stolen, was only beginning. As the first signs of spring touched the city, there was a quiet anticipation in the air. The faint scent of blooming flowers mixed with the dust of the streets. Ayan walked slowly, thinking about the days ahead, about the family he had lost, about the justice he had begun to bring into the world. And deep inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. He looked at Burhi Ama still tending her small shop, and realized she had been his anchor in a world that had tried to sweep him away. "Thank you for everything," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Burhi Ama smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "No, my child, it's you who gave hope back, to all of us." That night Ayan lay awake thinking of his father, the judge who had never given up, of Burhi Ama, the woman whose kindness had become his lifeline, and of the courage that had led him to act when no one else would. The city slept, unaware of the quiet revolution that had begun in a small shop, in the hands of a boy who refused to be invisible. And as the stars twinkled above, Ayan felt a certainty he hadn't known before, that life, no matter how cruel, could always be reclaimed. The next morning, Ayan woke with a restless energy. Sleep had offered no comfort. His mind was full of fragments of his past, images of Burhi Ama's trembling hands, and the unfamiliar face of a father he had never known. He knew that today he would meet him. The senior officer had arranged a meeting at the judge's residence. Ayan's heart thumped wildly as he approached the tall iron gates. The mansion was imposing, white marble glinting faintly in the morning sun, surrounded by well-kept gardens. It felt almost unreal to him. This world, so different from the dusty streets, the tiny shop, and the struggles he had known, was suddenly within reach. The gates opened, and a man appeared. His posture was straight, his eyes sharp yet gentle. Every line on his face told of years of responsibility, of decisions that had shaped lives, and of a longing that had never faded. "Ayan," the man said softly, his voice shaking slightly. "Is it really you?" Ayan froze. The man's eyes, they were strikingly familiar, deep, steady, yet full of the same unspoken questions that Ayan carried in his own heart. I think so," Ayan replied, his voice small, uncertain. "I don't remember everything." The man stepped closer, his hand reaching out tentatively. "It doesn't matter. You're here now. You're safe, finally." Ayan felt something he hadn't felt in years, the warmth of recognition. Something that wasn't just physical, but deeper, a connection that time, distance, or misfortune could not erase. I've been lost for so long," Ayan whispered, tears threatening to spill. "I never knew." His father shook his head, a mixture of sorrow and relief crossing his face. "I know, my son. I never stopped searching. Every day I wondered where you were, what you were going through. And now, finally, I see you." They stood there for a long moment, two souls reuniting after years of pain and uncertainty. Outside, the world moved on as always, but within the walls of the mansion, time seemed to pause. Later, Ayan was led inside. The interior was luxurious, but it was the personal touches, photographs of family, books stacked carefully, small mementos, that drew his attention. He realized that even in a life built for prestige, his father had waited for him with unwavering hope. "Do you want to talk?" his father asked, gesturing to a quiet sitting room. Ayan nodded, sinking into a chair, still trying to absorb everything. He spoke slowly, recounting the memories he could remember, the early glimpses of a home he had never truly known, the streets where he had survived, and most importantly, Burhi Ama, who had been his anchor. His father listened silently, nodding, letting him speak. When Ayan finished, there was a long pause. "You've been through so much," the judge said finally, his voice heavy with emotion. "And yet, you've kept your spirit, your honesty, and your courage. I am proud of you, Ayan, proud in ways I cannot fully express." Ayan's chest tightened. Pride was a strange feeling, so foreign, yet so comforting. For the first time in his life he felt seen, valued, not for what he could earn or survive, but simply for who he was. But even as joy and relief washed over him, there was another matter: justice. The policeman who had harmed Burhi Ama could not go unpunished. His father, a judge who had dedicated his life to fairness, promised Ayan that they would face consequences. Within days a formal case was filed, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Ayan sat quietly, clutching Burhi Ama's hand. She had come along, fragile yet determined, ready to testify about everything she had endured. Her eyes met Ayan's, and a silent gratitude passed between them. He had given her hope when all seemed lost. The trial was tense. The policeman, once bold and arrogant, now fidgeted nervously under the weight of the evidence. Ayan's video, detailed testimonies, and Burhi Ama's heartfelt words painted a clear picture of their abuse of power. The judge overseeing the trial, an impartial authority, listened carefully to every word. When the verdict was finally delivered, the policemen were sentenced appropriately. Justice was served, not in haste or malice, but in recognition of courage, honesty, and the truth. Ayan felt a mixture of relief and pride as the courtroom emptied. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and years of neglect, yet he had prevailed, not through strength of body but strength of heart. Later, as they walked back to the small shop, Burhiama looked at him, her eyes shining with tears. "You've changed everything," she whispered. "Not just for me, but for everyone who thought they were powerless." Ayan smiled, a deep, quiet smile. "We changed it together," he replied. The streets seemed brighter now, softer somehow. The hardships remained, yes, but so did the courage to face them. And for Ayan, the lost boy who had been cast aside, there was now a life rebuilt, anchored in family, justice, and the unwavering hope that even the smallest acts of courage could alter the course of destiny. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Ayan began to settle into his new life. Lessons, laughter, and even small disagreements with his father. All of it felt real, grounding, and profoundly human. Yet, every time he passed by Burhiama's shop, he paused. He would watch her carefully arrange the few items she sold, her hands shaking slightly, but her spirit intact. And he knew that part of him, part of the boy who had survived the streets, who had watched, learned, and acted, would always belong here. He knelt briefly, placing a small coin in her jar, not as charity, but as recognition. "For everything you've done," he said softly. Burhiama smiled, her eyes glistening. "No, my child, this is your life now, but yes, thank you for letting me be part of it." And as the sun set, casting golden light across the street, Ayan realized something important. The world could be cruel, people could be unjust, but courage, honesty, and love, these were forces no injustice could take away, and for the first time he truly believed that he had a place in this world, a family, and a future worth fighting for. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Ayan. The streets he had known so well, the narrow lanes, the dusty corners, the tiny shops, were still part of him, yet his world had expanded into places he had never imagined. His father, the judge, insisted on taking time with him, letting him adjust slowly, but also guiding him gently into a life he had missed. There were mornings filled with books, afternoons with quiet walks in the garden, and evenings where they simply sat together, talking, or sitting in silence, letting the comfort of presence speak louder than words. Yet, despite the comfort of this new life, Ayan often thought of Burhiama. She had been more than a guardian of his heart. She had been his anchor, his safe harbor when the world had been cruel. One afternoon he returned to her shop, now repaired and orderly, the faded blue paint replaced with a brighter shade, sunlight reflecting softly from the glass jars. "Burhiama," he said, his voice warm but gentle, "I want you to know, I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, you'll always have me." Burhiama's hands trembled as she wiped a tear from her cheek. "Ayan, you've already given me more than I could ever ask for. You gave me hope, courage, and now you're giving it to yourself too." She gestured for him to sit. "Come, have some tea. You need to rest. You've been through so much, my child." Ayan sat, the faint aroma of cardamom and sugar filling the small room. For a moment it felt like the world had slowed, that the chaos and pain of the past months had melted into something softer, more human. "I can't believe I finally met my father," he said after a while, staring out the small window. "And he's everything I didn't know I needed." Burhiama nodded, eyes glistening. "Sometimes life takes away, my child, but it also gives back, in ways we never imagine. Your father, he's been waiting, yes. But you waited too in your own way." Ayan's hands clenched slightly. "It's strange, part of me still feels like that lost boy in the streets, the one who had nothing. And yet, here I am, sitting with you, talking about the future." Burhiama reached out, gently touching his arm. "That boy, he's still you. Never forget him, because he's the reason you have the courage to step into what comes next." The streets outside were quieter now, the distant hum of traffic and the soft chatter of neighbors mixing with the scent of freshly baked bread from nearby stalls. Life had not paused, it was moving, shifting, slowly healing. And in that small moment, Ayan understood that he was no longer just surviving. He was beginning to live. Days turned into weeks, and gradually he started spending more time with his father. Lessons in law, morality, and responsibility unfolded gently, never rushed. His father showed him old case files, explaining the principles of justice, not just as a profession, but as a way to protect those who could not protect themselves. Ayan listened carefully, absorbing not just the facts, but the weight of the responsibility. He realized that the courage he had shown in recording the policeman, in standing up for Burhiama, was only the beginning. True courage, he understood now, was consistent. It was standing for what is right, even when no one is watching. One evening, as the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the mansion gardens, Ayan and his father walked together. Ayan broke the silence, his voice soft but firm. "Father, I want to help people like Burhiama, people who are scared, powerless. I want to make sure they have someone to stand for them." His father's eyes softened, pride evident in every line of his face. "That is the spirit of a true guardian, Ayan, and I will help you. Together we can make sure that no one else has to suffer in silence." Back in the neighborhood, Burhiama watched Ayan walk down the street, his posture more confident, his eyes bright with determination. She knew that this boy, the one everyone had once ignored, was now a force that could not be silenced. And for her, that was the greatest reward. The policemen who had tormented her faced their punishments swiftly. Public disgrace and formal sentencing ensured that their cruelty would not be forgotten. For Ayan, justice had been more than a concept. It had been a lesson in accountability, courage, and the power of truth. And yet life was still tender, still fragile. Burhiama's health remained delicate, and the small shop still demanded care. But the neighborhood, inspired by Ayan's bravery, began to rally around her. People who had once ignored the hardships of others now stepped forward, offering help, kindness, and companionship. One evening, as Ayan sat on the porch of the mansion, he reflected on his journey. The lost boy of the streets, the witness of injustice, the grandson of time and fate. He had survived. He had acted when it mattered most, and now he had a family, a home, and a purpose. Yet the memories of the dusty streets, the small shop, and Burhiama's quiet resilience were never far. They reminded him that no matter how high he rose, he could never forget where he came from. That compassion and courage were born from the hardest trials, and that those trials had shaped him into who he was meant to be. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the gentle evening breeze on his face. For the first time in his life, he felt whole. The world had been cruel, yes, but it had also been generous. And in that delicate balance, Ayan knew he had finally found his place. He opened his eyes, seeing the stars begin to shimmer faintly above. Somewhere in the distance, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware of the quiet triumphs happening in a small shop and a young boy's heart. And Ayan smiled, a small, unwavering smile, knowing that whatever the future held, he had the courage, the love, and the truth to face it head on. The night stretched before him, peaceful, alive with possibilities, and in that moment, Ayan felt that the world, finally, truly, was his to embrace. The days slowly settled into a new rhythm, though nothing about Ayan's life was ever going to be ordinary again. Mornings began with the soft light spilling into the mansion's tall windows, warming the polished floors and the rows of books that lined the walls. He would sit at the breakfast table with his father, eating slowly, listening to stories of cases, of people helped, of decisions that had changed lives. Yet every time Ayan looked out the window, his mind wandered back to the streets he had once called home, to the dusty corners and the small shop where Burhiama worked tirelessly. He couldn't forget the fear, the struggle, and the quiet courage that had defined his life before this new world had opened to him. One afternoon, his father took him on a walk through the city, not the streets he had survived in, but the city's halls of justice, the courts, the libraries, the offices where decisions were made. They walked silently, the hum of the city all around them, until they reached a modest community center in a part of the city that still struggled with poverty and fear. "Here," his father said, stopping at the entrance, "this is where we can begin to make a difference, together. There are people here who need a voice, people who need someone to stand for them, just like you stood for Burhiama." Ayan nodded, his chest tightening. He could still remember the terror in her eyes, the helplessness in her trembling hands. He understood now that courage wasn't just an act, it was a responsibility, and he wanted to shoulder it. Inside the center he met families who were struggling, people ignored by the system, afraid of speaking out. Their stories were heavy with hardship, but Ayan listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions, and learning. Every story reminded him of Burhiama's struggle, of his own survival, and of the injustice that he had begun to confront. As the weeks passed, Ayan's bond with his father deepened. They worked together, strategizing ways to help the community, bringing legal advice and providing support for those who could not defend themselves. The judge was patient, guiding him not as an authority but as a mentor, nurturing Ayan's natural sense of justice. At home, Ayan learned about the family he had lost, the siblings he had never met, the life that had been waiting for him. There were tender moments of discovery, awkward silences, and laughter that came slowly, hesitant at first but eventually genuine. He realized that the family he had dreamed of was real, imperfect, yet loving. And yet, even in this newfound life, Ayan never forgot Burhiama. One evening he returned to her shop with his father. The tiny building, modest and humble, still carried the warmth of her spirit. She greeted them with a soft smile, her hands wringing nervously as she looked at the boy who had become a young man. "Burhi Ama," Ayan said, kneeling slightly as he placed a small package in her hands. "These are for you, medicines, supplies, anything you need, and more importantly, thank you for never giving up on me." Burhi Ama's eyes filled with tears. "Ayan, my child, it is you who has given me hope. You have changed everything." His father watched silently, a quiet smile on his face. He could see the bond, unbroken and steadfast, between the boy and the woman who had kept him safe when the world had turned cruel. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the neighborhood began to change. The courage that Ayan had shown inspired others. Neighbors came forward to help Burhi Ama rebuild her shop, to ensure that no one had to endure the kind of fear she had faced. Small acts of kindness multiplied, spreading quietly, yet powerfully. Meanwhile, Ayan's life in his father's world grew more complex. Lessons, responsibilities, and expectations came one after another. He studied law, observed court cases, and slowly began to understand the weight of justice. He learned that real power wasn't about authority. It was about the ability to protect, to act rightly, and to stand for those who couldn't stand for themselves. One rainy evening, Ayan found himself walking the streets near his old neighborhood, umbrella shielding him from the downpour. He paused in front of Burhi Ama's shop. The lights inside glowed warmly, and she stood there, smiling despite the rain dripping down her shoulders. "You're different now," she said softly, "stronger, but you've kept the heart of the boy who saw injustice and refused to look away. Never forget that, Ayan." He smiled a quiet, reflective smile. "I won't, Burhi Ama. I promise, and I'll make sure the world knows people like you, they matter, and they deserve justice." The rain fell harder, washing the streets clean, and in that cleansing moment, Ayan felt a sense of renewal. The lost boy of the streets, the witness of cruelty, the bearer of courage, he was no longer just surviving. He was shaping a future. That night, he returned home, stepping into the warm glow of the mansion, his father waiting patiently. They shared a quiet dinner, talking about small things, mundane things, and yet, each word carried weight. They were building not just a life, but a foundation. A life anchored in love, courage, and truth. And as Ayan lay in bed that night, memories of the past, the streets, Burhi Ama, and the first acts of courage he had taken flowed together. He realized that the past and the present were intertwined, that even the darkest moments had led him here, to a life where he could finally make a difference. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the boy who had become a young man, the woman who had stood bravely against cruelty, and the quiet justice that had begun to ripple through lives, slowly, inevitably, and beautifully. Ayan closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of family, the weight of responsibility, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, he was ready. Because courage, love, and truth were not just words, they were the life he had lived, and the life he was determined to build. The world had been cruel. The world had been unfair. And yet, it had given him something extraordinary, a chance to stand, to act, and to belong. And Ayan knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning. The following days brought a new rhythm, one that intertwined Ayan's past and present. His father, while patient and kind, insisted on introducing him to the extended family he had never met. Ayan's siblings, older and younger, had grown up with the memory of a lost brother lingering silently in their lives, and meeting him now was like discovering a piece of themselves that had been missing. At first the encounters were awkward. Ayan had spent years alone, surviving, observing, learning to trust no one. Yet as the siblings shared stories of their childhood, of games played, of parents' laughter echoing in rooms Ayan had never been in, he began to feel threads of connection weaving slowly through his heart. One afternoon, his father brought him to the family library. The tall shelves were filled with old books, legal documents, and photographs. Ayan's eyes fell on a photograph of himself as a toddler, taken at a time when life had been normal, happy, and filled with care. His chest tightened. "You see this?" his father asked softly, watching him. "You were loved, Ayan, and though life pulled us apart, that love never ended." Ayan touched the photo lightly, the edges worn from time. "I don't remember much," he whispered, "but seeing this, I feel like a part of me is waking up." "Yes," his father said, "that part has always been here, and now it's time to bring it back fully into your life." Meanwhile, Burhi Ama continued to recover, physically and emotionally. The community had begun supporting her, small gestures at first, but they grew steadily. Neighbors helped repair her shop, bought supplies, and visited her, ensuring she never felt alone again. She would often sit outside watching the world move, smiling at familiar faces, but always keeping a watchful eye for Ayan, her boy, her courage personified. One day Ayan returned to her shop carrying a small bundle. "Burhi Ama," he said, placing it gently on the counter. "I brought something for you." Curious, she opened it to find new medicines, fresh supplies, and a small notebook with handwritten letters from the neighborhood children. They wrote of gratitude, of hope, of being inspired by her strength and by the boy who had acted when no one else would. Burhi Ama's hands shook as she held the notebook. "Ayan, this is more than I could ever hope for," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He smiled softly. "You taught me what courage means, Burhi Ama, and now together we're making sure others see it too." As months passed, Ayan's relationship with his father deepened. Lessons in law turned into lessons in life, in ethics, in responsibility. Ayan learned not just to understand justice, but to embody it, helping the weak, standing up to those in power, and making sure the mistakes of the past did not repeat themselves. Then came a pivotal day, the final hearing for the policeman who had harmed Burhi Ama. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors, and families who had been inspired by Ayan's courage were there, waiting to see justice served. Ayan sat beside his father, holding Burhi Ama's hand. The policemen entered, their faces pale and rigid with fear, knowing their arrogance had finally caught up to them. The judge, an impartial authority, listened to the testimonies, examined the evidence, and finally, after hours of deliberation, delivered the verdict. Guilty, punished appropriately. The courtroom erupted with quiet murmurs of relief and gratitude. Burhi Ama wept openly, leaning on Ayan's shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. "They can never hurt anyone like that again." Ayan nodded, the weight in his chest lifting. "Yes. And now it's time to build, to help others, to make sure fear doesn't win anywhere else." That night, as he returned to the mansion, he looked out over the city, the streets he had walked. As a lost boy, the shop where he had first felt the power of courage, and the family who had finally found him, all of it formed a tapestry that was now his life. He realized that the boy who had been abandoned, the child who had survived the cruelest streets, was not gone. He had grown, transformed, yet retained the heart that had first driven him to act, to stand, to fight for justice. In the quiet of the night, Ayan reflected on the journey. From helplessness to courage, from loss to family, from silence to voice. He understood now that life's hardships were not the end, but the forge that shaped who he had become. And as he closed his eyes, he knew that this was not just his victory. It was a victory for Burhi Ama, for every powerless person who had ever been ignored, and for the boy who had once believed he had nothing. Ayan finally smiled, deeply, wholly, knowing that his life had found its purpose. And in that purpose lay hope, not just for him, but for everyone who would be touched by his courage. The world was vast, filled with uncertainty, but Ayan was ready. He was no longer lost. He was home. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm that was both new and comforting for Ayan. The mansion, once a place of strangers and unfamiliar faces, now felt like home. He shared meals with his father and siblings, learning their quirks, laughing at their jokes, and slowly discovering the bonds he had missed all those years. Each day brought lessons, some about law and justice, others about trust, patience, and love, but each one also reminded him of the streets he had come from and the people he had left behind. One morning, Ayan insisted on visiting Burhi Ama's shop. It had changed. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by fresh, soft blue. The shelves, once sparsely stocked, now held a small variety of goods, enough for her to live comfortably, though she still worked hard each day. What touched him most, however, was the subtle sense of community that had grown around the shop. Neighbors had started visiting, offering help, sharing news, or simply sitting with her for company. "Burhi Ama," Ayan said, stepping inside. "I've been thinking, we can do more than just help you survive. We can make sure this street, this neighborhood, everyone here feels safe and cared for." Burhi Ama looked at him, her eyes wide. "Ayan, my child, you've already done so much. You gave me hope, courage, life. What more can you do?" He knelt slightly, meeting her gaze. "I want to build a place where people like you, like me, people who are ignored can come and feel safe, where they can get help, medicines, support, and know they are not alone." Tears filled Burhi Ama's eyes. You are a true blessing. I never imagined someone like you would come into my life and change it so completely." Ayan smiled softly. "You gave me the courage, Burhi Ama, and now, it's time we pass it on to others." Together, they began planning. Word spread quickly. The neighbors offered support, local business owners donated supplies, and even some of Ayan's father's colleagues joined in, impressed by the courage of the young boy who had refused to stay silent. The community center they established became more than a place for help. It became a symbol of resilience. Children who had once wandered the streets alone now had a safe place to study. Adults who feared authority found a space where their voices were heard. Burhi Ama, though older and fragile, became the heart of the center, guiding and comforting everyone with the wisdom of her experiences. Meanwhile, Ayan's life with his father continued to deepen. Evenings in the mansion were no longer filled with awkward silences. They shared stories, sometimes quiet, sometimes full of laughter. His siblings grew protective of him, curious about the boy who had been lost yet returned stronger. One evening, as Ayan sat in the library, his father approached him with a thick folder. "Ayan," he said, his voice soft, "I want you to see this. It's a collection of cases, ones where children and families were ignored or abused. I think you might want to help these people too." Ayan took the folder, flipping through photographs, statements, and documents. Each story reminded him of Burhi Ama, of the policeman, of the fear he had once seen in helpless eyes. He realized that courage was not just a one-time act, it was a responsibility, and he was ready. Weeks later, the policemen who had harmed Burhi Ama were formally punished. Their sentences were fair and public. The neighborhood celebrated quietly, knowing that justice had been served. Yet the real victory was the message it sent. No one, no matter how powerful, could harm the innocent with impunity. Through it all, Ayan never forgot the streets he had come from. He often walked there, not as a boy lost and afraid, but as a young man who had faced injustice and acted. He visited the corners he had known, waved at familiar faces, and made sure the neighborhood felt seen, heard, and valued. One evening, Burhi Ama looked at him as he walked up the street, now a symbol of hope for the community. "Ayan, my child," she whispered to herself, "you have given us more than we could ever dream. You have given us life again." Ayan paused briefly, looking at the small shop, at Burhi Ama, at the street bathed in the golden glow of sunset. He felt a deep sense of peace. He had begun as a boy lost, abandoned, and ignored. And now, he was not just found, he was a source of hope, a bridge between worlds, and a reminder that courage, love, and honesty could change lives. Yet deep inside, he knew his journey wasn't over. There were still children, still families, still struggles waiting to be faced, and he was ready for them. Because Ayan had learned the most important lesson: the strength of one heart, when guided by courage and compassion, could ripple through an entire community, transforming fear into hope, pain into resilience, and loss into belonging. The city around him slept, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place, but Ayan didn't need anyone to notice. He had found himself, his family, and his purpose, and that was enough. The days flowed into weeks, and finally, the moment came for Ayan to meet his father's entire family. The mansion was buzzing softly with quiet excitement. His father had invited everyone, his mother, siblings, and even distant relatives who had never stopped wondering about the boy who had disappeared so long ago. Ayan stepped into the drawing room, the air heavy with anticipation. He felt a tremor of nervousness. This was a world so different from the dusty streets and Burhi Ama's shop, yet it was a world he had earned the right to belong to. One by one, his family approached him. His mother's eyes filled with tears as she embraced him, holding him tightly as if afraid he might vanish again. His siblings stared at him in awe, unsure whether to hug him or simply study the boy who had survived alone for so long. Ayan hesitated for a moment, then wrapped his arms around them, feeling a warmth he had never known before. "It's really you," his mother whispered, voice breaking. "After all these years, you're finally here." Ayan nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I never thought I would belong somewhere like this, but now I feel like I finally do." His father stepped forward, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Ayan, you've done more than just survive. You've shown courage, honesty, and strength beyond your years. That is why you belong, not because of blood, but because of the heart you've shown." And in that moment, Ayan understood fully. Family was more than shared blood. It was love, it was courage, it was showing up when it mattered most. The next morning, he visited Burhi Ama's shop again, bringing with him his father and siblings. Burhi Ama's eyes widened at the sight of the family, and for a long moment, none of them spoke. Then she embraced Ayan, holding him as if she never wanted to let go. "You've given me hope," she whispered, voice trembling. "Not just for me, but for everyone around you." Ayan smiled, feeling the weight of every struggle he had endured. "You gave me courage first, Burhi Ama. You saved me before anyone else could. Now, it's our turn to save others." Together they walked through the neighborhood, opening the doors of the new community center, Children laughed, neighbors helped, and the streets, once shadows of fear, began to glow with possibility. Ayan's father watched quietly, pride shining in his eyes. "This is your world too, Ayan, and you've already begun to make it better." And in that moment, as the sun set over the city, bathing everything in gold, Ayan realized the truth he had fought so hard to discover. The lost boy of the streets was gone. In his place stood a young man who had faced fear, uncovered justice, reunited with family, and kindled hope in the hearts of many. He looked at Burhi-Ama, at his father, at his siblings, and finally at himself in the reflection of the window. His eyes were steady, unwavering, filled with both the pain of the past and the promise of the future. "Nothing," he whispered softly to himself, "nothing can take courage from someone who refuses to be silent." The city continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place, but the impact was undeniable. The boy who had been abandoned had returned not broken, but stronger, wiser, and unshakably brave. And as the stars began to sparkle in the evening sky, Ayan stood tall, feeling the full weight and beauty of life. He had been lost, he had been broken, but now he was found. The streets, the shop, the family, the community, all had come together through courage, love, and truth. And Ayan knew, in the deepest part of his heart, that this was only the beginning of a life lived boldly, with purpose, and with unwavering justice. Because some boys may be lost, but heroes are never truly gone. The world had seen him fall, yet it would now witness him rise. And rise he did, stronger, fearless, and unstoppable. The story ends here, with Ayan standing at the threshold of his destiny, found, whole, and ready to embrace a future of hope, justice, and boundless courage. This is his triumph, his life, his legacy,